Dad?
So, let's talk about daddy issues. Welcome to the Lost Explained episode guide, in which we will be exploring and explaining Lost, episode by episode, mystery by mystery. These guides are spoiler heavy and intended for those who already know the secrets of the island. White Rabbit is the 5th episode of Season 1 and is a Jack-centric storyline that sees the good doctor wrestling with memories of his father, kicked up by some ghostly visions of the man on the island. We also see the oceanic survivors worry about their dwindling water supply as they look to the resident doctor for leadership, which, to put it mildly, he's reluctant to take on. White Rabbit is a cornerstone episode in the series because it establishes more building blocks in the mythology, the emerging hierarchy of the group's dynamic, and sees Jack rise to become the de facto leader. Let's get into it. I think it was an interesting choice for the show to make a doctor the leader of the group, as one could argue there are many other more qualified candidates, if you'll pardon that pun of unintentional foreshadowing. For example, there's Saeed, whose military experience and ability to keep a cool head under pressure make him quite suited for the job, in my opinion. However, this is 2004, so it's unlikely that an entire group of Westerners would turn to a Muslim Iraqi to lead them. Some might also argue that Michael demonstrates leadership qualities as well, and we see this happening later when he takes charge during a cave-in disaster and leads the construction of the raft, which gives the entire group of castaways hope. But his focus is too often diverted away from the bigger picture by his son Walt. Kate would be a logical choice too, as there are many characters who do look to her in that first season, except that she doesn't appear interested in being in charge at all, and frequently defers to Jack anyway. Plus, she's a criminal, and is always worried about that fact coming out. Better to stay out of the spotlight for now, I think, Kate. Interestingly enough, early on in this episode we see that Boone wants to be a leader, but let's be honest, he is more of a follower, and I think he's wrestling with this post-crash. He has a distinct lack of control and utility in this place, which is why he challenges Jack following the drowning of Joanna in that opening scene.
You think you're all noble and heroic for coming after me? I was fine! You're not the only one who knows what to do around here, you know that? I run a business! Who appointed you our savior, huh?
Towards the end of the episode, we see that Boone has made a rather foolish decision to hoard the water in order to make it last long enough to nurse Claire, but his rationale does have a certain logic to it. Let's not forget that they are all strangers to one another, and he simply didn't trust the others to be sensible with the rations. After all, there are selfish scavengers roaming among them, like Sawyer. Locke is another person that the group starts looking to at different points throughout the story, initially for providing food as their resident hunter, then later for advice and counsel. At this point in the game, Locke isn't really interested in being a leader, as he seems to be on his own journey of discovery. It's ironic that Locke is the one to give Jack the confidence and motivation to become the man in charge of the castaways, confidence that Locke himself was never actually given in his own life, and it's only as the weeks progress and the Jack versus Locke conflict grows that he starts to want to take charge of situations himself. I think for the majority of Season 1, Locke feels a sense of separation between himself and the rest of the survivors. Jack can lead them and tell them what to do on the beach or in the caves, but Locke has his own plans and his own goals, especially with the hatch. That's his discovery, his secret, his destiny, and he is the master of his own realm. It's only when Jack starts to encroach upon Locke's territory, by challenging the man's decision-making and questioning his spiritual motivations, that the man of faith feels threatened. During Season 2, we will see Locke become far more interested in co-leadership. Now, I don't think he really wants to be in charge of the oceanic survivors. He just doesn't want to be told what to do, or more specifically, he doesn't want Jack to tell him what he can't do, and he has a very strong sense of ownership when it comes to the Swan.
Who are we to tell anyone what they can or can't do?
All of this to say that Jack is actually the right man for the job at the right time. I do know there are many critics of Jack as a leader within the fan base. There are even characters in the show that give voice to this.
Back when you were calling the shots, you pretty much just reacted. See, you didn't think, Jack. And as I recall, a lot of people ended up dead.
Most of the criticisms seem to stem from his attitude of "I know best," which is often interpreted as arrogance or defensiveness. If he has made up his mind about something, then there is no going back. Well, until he has to go back.
We have to go back!
So why is Jack like this? Well, we know that he developed an insecurity complex from his father from a very young age, which we actually see the birth of in this episode. Christian explicitly tells him that he's not good enough and that he doesn't have what it takes to succeed under pressure or in difficult situations. And young Jack internalises Christian's comments, and I believe it creates the foundation for all of Jack's ongoing internal struggles. As a result, Jack becomes eager to prove his father's proclamation wrong, both as a doctor, but also as a man. He pushes harder than anyone despite these insecurities, and this tends to make him rather bull-headed. He won't give up, he doesn't want to let anyone down, and he feels tremendous guilt when he loses a life or leaves someone behind, because it's a reminder that maybe his father's judgment was right, and that he doesn't have what it takes. Imposter syndrome is a very real thing that plagues many people throughout their lives, no matter how talented or successful they are. Jack is a reflection of how showrunner Damon Lindelof felt during the making of Season 1, which is something we will explore a bit further in the constants and variables section of this video. Basically, Christian's terrible parenting informs the very basis of Jack's malfunctions as a human being. At the same time, it's also what leads to his strengths as well, because he self-criticises and self-reflects. He isn't in it for the wrong reasons. He's an altruistic leader. The best people for the job are the ones that are not in it for the control or the status, but in it for the good of their community. Always beware those who crave power and leadership, as we see with characters like Benjamin Linus or Charles Widmore later on. Say what you want about Jack, but he is definitely not a selfish leader out for himself. He wants to do the right thing for both his patients and his people. This, in my opinion, gives him integrity. His stewardship of this ragtag group of survivors cannot be bought by anyone, and he won't be corrupted or seduced into betraying his role or his duty of care by throwing these people under the bus for selfish motivations. Well, not for a while anyway, but we will get to that iffy storyline about the deal he makes with Ben when we cover Season 3. Anyway, the point is, all of this stems from his dysfunctional relationship to Christian, because he is constantly trying to prove his father wrong in some way. As it turns out, he does have what it takes.
You have what it takes. What did you just say? I said you have what it takes. You said you know what that meant.
And this episode is all about Jack wrestling with this. It shows him literally trying to run away from making decisions for the group, even though, as Locke says,
And they need someone to tell them what to do.
Me? I can't.
Why can't you?
Because I'm not a leader.
And yet they all treat you like one.
Another complaint I've seen come up about Jack is the fact that he is overly emotional. One of the problems of viewing Lost is that it's very easy to forget the compressed time frame we are watching these characters inhabit during the first 3 seasons. They're on the island for a matter of weeks, not years, and Jack is still dealing not just with the post-crash PTSD like everyone else, but also with the emotional fallout from his father's death, a man whom he felt he had betrayed, a feeling which is also painfully reinforced by his own mother, no less.
You don't get to say, I can't. Not after what you did.
He fully believes that this betrayal led to Christian drinking himself to death. The guilt and grief is overwhelming. The only reason why he isn't a bigger emotional wreck is because the plane crash essentially pushed back and superseded any other issues going on in his life. That doesn't mean he has dealt with all of this painful history or all of his daddy issues. In fact, he won't fully finish dealing with these issues until the very penultimate scene of the very last episode of the entire series. So when you see Jack getting emotional during intense moments involving life and death, just remember that he is still in the throes of grief. It has been mere days since his father died, and he absorbed the blame for all of it. What's more, his father's body is now missing, and he's seen him walking around the damn island, making him question everything he thought he knew as an ardent man of science. Either he's losing his grip on reality, which would be scary enough, or his father is really out there in the jungle somewhere, waiting to confront his son, which, let's be honest, is even scarier. Jack is a haunted man, and a lot of his uncertainty and anger about his father ends up being projected onto his new mentor figure, John Locke, the elder member of the group, who often makes Jack doubt his own sense of self and systems of belief, much like Christian once did. It's no coincidence that the man in black who represents the past and all negative thought and emotions ends up embodying both Christian and Locke, two men who had a massive impact on Jack and whose deaths weighed heavily on his conscience. White Rabbit is most notable for giving us the first real man of science, man of faith scene in the series. Jack and Locke have a very significant conversation here. As Jack chases the apparent ghost of his father around the jungle, he struggles to accept what he's seeing, which becomes his default setting for almost the whole series. However, there is a flourish to him in this scene that suggests he might be a little bit open to the possibility that his father is really here. There is something so innocent about the way Matthew Fox acts in this scene, almost like a child being taught a lesson by an older teacher and slowly grasping the meaning. Part of me believes that Jack might have been more open to the magic of the island had he not come to so deeply resent Locke following Boone's death. That is the schism point between them, in which he becomes totally closed off to Locke's spiritualism and advice. But as we see, Locke is right about many things throughout the course of the show. He has instincts and intuitions, all of which are being guided by a higher power. He understands something innate about what is happening to everyone, and I think Jack inherently recognises that very early on. I actually think he looks up to and respects Locke for most of Season 1, until the tragic accident with Boone. The Jack-Locke dynamic is such a fascinating relationship in the series. The B-plot on the island sees Kate and Saeed turning detective to unmask the culprit responsible for stealing the water rations. Kate and Saeed always tended to partner up throughout the show for the greater good of the group, always backing each other up and maintaining a trusting relationship of mutual respect. Thankfully, the writers allowed the relationship to remain platonic. Their investigation is a diverting enough side quest that helps to set up the Saeed and Sawyer clash that is to come in just a few episodes' time in Confidence Man, as well as an attempt to soften up Kate and Sawyer's animosity, which we will see shift gears in a very big way in that same episode. I particularly find interesting Sawyer throwing Kate the Marshal's badge and suggesting with great irony that she has now become the sheriff of their community. Now, I suspect this line was chucked in as a potential setup for a storyline that never materialised. It's worth remembering that during Season 1, the network wanted a scripted drama series version of Survivor, so some of these moments might have been the writers' room's way of planting potential storylines as they played with the sociological possibilities of the group. After all, they already have a hunter and a leader now established, but what if they would need a sheriff to enforce the laws of this new society that they were building? In the series format document that Damon Lindelof devised with J.J. Abrams, suggestions for possible episodes included the castaways holding an actual trial on the beach, with John Locke as the prosecution and Kate as the defence. So this moment feels like it could have been foreshadowing that idea. Luckily for us, the show never went down the road of, "We live in an island society," although they did get to explore some of those ideas more indirectly later on with the others in Season 3. Claire has some interesting scenes in this episode too, one in particular that stands out. She shares a sweet scene with Charlie where he tends to her thirst and tries to reassure her that everything is going to be okay. This is their first significant interaction together, and I believe the scene that demonstrated to the writers that these two had good chemistry as a couple. We will see them get paired together for the rest of the season as friends, even though it's clear that Charlie is looking for something more. Their relationship remains mostly chaste going forward, then severely deflates in Season 2, before reconciling and becoming more romantic in Season 3. But it all stems from this scene. There's also a moment between Kate and Claire in which Claire mentions that she is into astrology and star signs. This was something that was going to be a bigger plot point in the show, but eventually got dropped. Season 1 writer David Fury went on record explaining how this scene was going to be a setup for something else. How Claire was going to notice that the stars were in the wrong place, and that this was going to be the first clue that the island was moving. Yep, we were going to get that plot point established in Season 1. Alas, this revelation never materialised for various reasons, although Claire's predisposition for mysticism and pseudoscience is a really good setup for her upcoming backstory with a psychic and some of his alarming predictions. So there's some solid groundwork being laid for several character dynamics and relationships that will become crucial to the arc of the series. Overall, White Rabbit is a fun episode. The flashbacks are short and to the point, often lasting for no more than one short scene at a time, something that I appreciate a lot about these early episodes. There isn't a lot of time to meander through the past, as usually what's happening on the island is far more important and exciting. I particularly love Christian's introduction scene in Jack's childhood flashback. Everything about the way this is performed and directed is pitch perfect. From the way the camera is always looking up at Christian to put us in young Jack's point of view, to the way that the scene is blocked as Christian moves around the room, lecturing his son on things he is far too young to fully comprehend. How he talks about losing a young boy in surgery, then swallows down his anguish with a gulp of scotch and an unhealthy dose of denial. It's easily among my favourite flashback scenes from the first season. John Terry, who plays Christian Shepherd, often gets overlooked in the acting Olympics of Lost, but in my opinion he gives one of the best guest star performances in the entire series, and his charismatic, indelible turn as Christian Shepherd casts a long shadow over every Jack episode. It's clear that the writers could see how great John Terry was in the role, as they later found ways to integrate him into the mythology of the on-island present, making him the face of the Man in Black for a couple of seasons, and later again as the Good Shepherd guiding our characters through the final gateway of the Sideways. I could watch John Terry and Matthew Fox fence forever. They have such great chemistry as on-screen father and son, and their loaded relationship always provides the writers with plenty of dramatic ammunition, due to just how temperamental the dynamic is. Just wonderful casting there. The on-island story has plenty of drama going on between the survivors as they start to dissent and point fingers and splinter over who should take charge. It's a fairly believable portrait of how group dynamics work in high-pressure survival situations. Arguments amid all of the uncertainty are bound to create fracture lines. No rescue, no leader, no water. This is a dire predicament indeed, but Jack comes to the rescue at just the right moment to give them some hope. Whether that hope is real or false, it is still hope. It's a lesson Jack learned from his father. So this episode raises more questions than it actually answers, but that's something we become rather accustomed to with the show. In fact, it only really answers definitively why Jack was in Australia. Jack came to Sydney on his mother's instruction to track down his missing father, who himself was in Australia on a drinking binge, with a certain yet-to-be-introduced companion. It appears that his main goal was trying to reconnect with his Australian daughter Claire Littleton, only without much success. This was surely in response to his recent estrangement from his own son in America. Christian was seeking solace and appreciation from his other kid, who he had yet to screw things up with. Why did Charlie claim that he doesn't swim?
I don't swim! I don't swim!
Right at the top of this episode, Charlie claims that he doesn't swim, and that is why he did not risk his life by going to help Joanna. To be fair, there weren't many other volunteers for that job on that beach. It seems only Boone and Jack were decisive enough to act in the moment. However, this does create an apparent discrepancy, doesn't it? Because later on in the series, when Charlie claims,
I was junior swim champion in Northern England. I can hold my breath for 4 minutes. I know exactly what you're talking about, Jack.
we find out that not only can Charlie swim, he can actually swim to a really competent level. Now, of course, he may have been exaggerating being a swim champion just to win the gig, but we see him being taught to swim by his father at Butlins, a moment that he lists among his greatest hits from his life. And then we see Charlie swimming very well beneath the looking glass unaided. Now, you can't do that if you have no swimming ability like he originally claimed. All of this basically means that Charlie was lying when he said that he didn't swim. I think many fans view this as a retcon at best, or a continuity error at worst. It could very well be, but I don't think it actually matters too much to the story because it also conveniently fits Charlie's character arc very well indeed. I've always looked at this statement as a perfect example of his cowardice. Remember, he's a self-declared coward in the beginning.
Every track needs a coward.
I'm not a coward.
And this test of bravery to save Joanna from drowning is also happening several episodes before Locke helps him to turn away from the heroin in the Moth. He is still in the throes of his addiction here, and he keeps his heroin on him at all times in his pocket, which has been depicted in a couple of scenes in previous episodes. The last thing an addict like Charlie is going to do is risk his stash by jumping in the water or leaving it on the beach unattended. He might even be high in this very moment. So no, I don't view this as a discrepancy per se. Charlie is only just beginning his journey here, a journey that will take him on a full arc. Season 1 Charlie has a long way to go before becoming the man that we see in Season 3 episode Greatest Hits. So to me, this actually enriches his arc more. We see him go from a selfish, cowardly drug addict to a selfless, brave, recovering addict. Why was Jack seeing the ghost of his dead father on the island? As we shall discover, the smoke monster is the disembodied consciousness of the man in black, which has been uncoupled from its mortal form and been fused with and is now powered by the light beneath the island. In this disembodied state, the man in black can shapeshift into other corporeal forms, as long as those forms are already dead and their bodies are on the island, because the light within them, aka their soul, has returned to the source and their vessel is now empty. The show goes on to establish that the man in black cannot appear permanently as a person who is still alive. The best he can manage is to take the temporary form of a memory from someone he has scanned. There is some debate around the Christian character's appearances on the island due to his various costume changes and the specific context of each appearance. Some claim it's actually a mix of island-generated apparitions and the actual ghost of Christian, but I think it's far simpler to understand, especially considering we have an in-show confirmation in the final season. Whenever we see Christian appear on the island, it's the man in black. We know that Christian's body was on the plane and is now missing from its coffin, because the man in black found the coffin first. In fact, it made landfall in his old home in the caves, where his real body still resides. We will see the man in black hijack and hide bodies in order to convince the people he's manipulating that he is that dead person manifest and brought back to life in some way. He does this with Christian's body, and then later Yemi's body, presumably taking them underground somewhere into the tunnels that he uses to get around the island, where they will presumably never be found again. He also does this to a lesser extent with John Locke's body, whom he leaves in the belly of the cargo hold of the Ajira plane, since it is highly unlikely that any of the Ajira survivors would open up a dead man's coffin, right? Right?
Terrific.
Essentially, there is always an angle to whenever the smoke monster manifests as someone else. Either he is trying to sow the seeds of doubt and distrust, create confusion and paranoia, trying to lead people to their deaths, or he is trying to manipulate people into doing things that they might not have done otherwise. The point of doing this in this episode with Christian's body is so he can lure Jack away from the beach into the jungle. In the previous episode Walkabout, we see that the man in black has been studying Jack and has come to the correct conclusion that Jack is the strongest willed of all the candidates. If he could just get him on his own. And this is something we will see the man in black do again and again. Divide and conquer. In Season 6 episode The Last Recruits, there is a crucial exchange of dialogue when Jack asks the man in black, who is currently inhabiting the form of John Locke, point blank,
The third day we were here, I saw I chased my father through the jungle, my dead father. Was that you?
Yes, that was me.
When confronted by Jack with this question, the man in black deflects. Technically, yes, the apparition of Christian does lead Jack to the caves and fresh water, but Jack is already in the vicinity of the caves, and this only happens after the first plan failed. What was that first plan? Well, when Jack is chasing Christian's ghost around the jungle, fake Christian waits. Jack springs into a run to catch him. He trips and falls. Christian disappears. And Jack rolls down the hill and over the edge of a cliff face. And if it were not for John Locke being nearby to lend a helping hand, Jack would almost certainly have died right there and then as we see him losing his grip. Sure, the man in black could have been lying about appearing as Christian on that day, but there is also this episode from the Lost official podcast where the showrunners reinforce this answer.
Is it safe to assume that the smoke monster can only take on the persona of dead people? Is it also safe to assume that when Hurley was in the mental hospital that Dave was real and was one of the dead people he could talk to? If both of these things are correct, was Dave on the island the smoke monster or just regular Dave? Thanks. I love Lost! From Camille in San Antonio, Texas. And she wants to be safe to make these assumptions.
These are excellent questions, Camille, and not ones that we're going to answer here in the podcast. But we will say this: in the near future, relatively near future, one of the characters on the show will be asking some of these very questions, and they will be asking someone who knows the answers, and that someone will provide the answers in a way that we are not providing them right now.
Wow.
So
excellent. That's good. That is good. It's hope.
The episode they are talking about was The Last Recruit, and the scene they are pre-hashing is the one we just discussed. So, was on-island Christian always the man in black? The writers are strongly indicating that he was, and it also fits with the in-show information. Is Locke right? Are the oceanic survivors really here for a reason? Yes, it turns out that Locke is absolutely correct. The plane did crash for a reason. It all relates to the very nature and causality of time itself. The primary purpose of their crash was about bringing them to the island to fulfill this destiny, which involves saving the world from destruction, once in 1977 and once again in 2007. More specifically, some of these survivors had been handpicked as potential replacements for an ancient island demigod known as Jacob, who was nearing the end of his tenure and was looking to retire, needing someone to take over protecting the island after he was gone. This specifically selected group are known as candidates. Once chosen, Jacob touches and activates them, and these candidates are set on a path of causality to the island's shores, where fate awaits them. Why was this apparition of Christian wearing white tennis shoes? When the man in black replicates a dead body, he tends to take on their guise as they looked at the point of death, including their clothing. We see this more specifically with Yemi and how he's in that dusty, dirty priest attire, and then we later see with Alex in the smoke monster summoning chamber, and then Isabella on the Black Rock, then finally Locke in his burial suit. That doesn't mean he can't change those clothes, of course. In fact, we see him do this with fake Locke a couple of times. Just look at that neatly folded pile of clothing on the beach there. I guess technically that's all smoke monster particles that have reformed to create the illusion of clothing, but he eventually changes into the more familiar t-shirts and khakis that Locke was known for wearing. We also see him change out of Christian's burial suit and into a more dressed down look, so as not to make any of the people who come across him wonder why there is such a well-dressed guy walking around the jungle. Anyway, this is all a roundabout way of getting back to those white tennis shoes. As explained in Season 5, Episode 316, whilst preparing Christian's body for burial, Jack couldn't find a pair of black shoes to match the suit, and thought since no one was going to see his dad's feet anyway, he could get away with just slipping on a pair of white tennis shoes. So I think this little detail helps us to understand that when the man in black copies the dead, he copies the whole visage until the time comes to change wardrobe. It all depends on who he is manipulating. White Rabbit is the perfect follow-up to Walkabout, for while it's not as great as its predecessor, it does continue the work of setting up an operating thesis for the series. Two major core themes of Lost are articulated in dialogue within this very episode. The first comes from Locke's philosophy that everything happening to them is happening for a reason.
What if everything that happened here happened for a reason?
And the second theme articulated is Jack's unwavering belief in the importance of community, in putting the greater good of the group over the good of the individual, which is beautifully summed up as,
But if we can't live together, we're gonna die alone.
These two themes will go on to define massive swathes of the Lost canon. It is in this episode that we see the references to Alice in Wonderland begin. Following the White Rabbit is a reference to Alice entering the dreamlike fantasy-scape of Wonderland after chasing a white rabbit down a rabbit hole. It's become a shorthand term for characters entering a magical realm full of strange characters and situations, deadly threats, and awe-inspiring wonders. And as Jack follows his white rabbit down the rabbit hole, he takes us, the audience, with him into uncharted territory. I don't think the show could make the implications any more overt. We are in their equivalent of Wonderland. We will see future references to Lewis Carroll's classic books with episode titles such as Through the Looking Glass, which was the sequel book to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. There will also be literal white rabbits aplenty hopping around, most of them connected to the presence of Benjamin Linus. Most significantly, the white rabbit that he literally follows across the perimeter of the barracks and into the jungle. Again, following the white rabbit into Wonderland. Then there is of course the Looking Glass station name and its insignia, which depicts a white rabbit. One might even draw further parallels to Jacob's lighthouse in the season 6 episode titled Lighthouse. In that tower we see mirrors that reflect locations that were once occupied by our losties during significant moments in their lives. And my interpretation has always been that Jacob goes through the looking glass in order to visit them on the other side, which is why we see the church that young Sawyer was attending for the funeral of his parents. There are many more Wonderland references and Easter eggs, such as posters on walls and books being read, most of which I will point out once we get to them. As I've already explored with Jack, this is the episode that introduces a long-running sub-theme throughout the series, daddy issues. Now this is going to come up a lot, so much so that I feel like I need to create some kind of alert. Out of all the characters in the show, Jack easily has the longest running and most complicated relationship to his father out of the whole cast. Yes, even including Locke and Anthony Cooper. In fact, the dysfunction runs so deep between them that it not only creates the foundational character flaws for our resident doctor in terms of how he deals with difficult situations and his own failures as a leader, but it won't get fully resolved until the penultimate scene of the entire series. Imagine having such bad daddy issues that you take them with you into your afterlife. But hey, issues with parents, and fathers in particular, are so ubiquitous within the Lost canon that it became somewhat of a running joke within the fandom over the years. Our characters can beat back the spread of darkness and evil across the entire planet, but they still don't know how to talk to their dads. The origin point for almost all of the mythology will also come down to Jacob and the Man in Black having unresolved issues with their mother. See, even demigods have mummy and daddy hang-ups. Showrunner Damon Lindelof has gone on record as saying that Jack and his relationship to Christian was almost semi-autobiographical, and that he found himself often mirroring aspects of his own fractured paternal relationship within the text of the show, which is probably why so many characters have issues with their fathers. But I think it's most specifically concentrated within Jack and Christian's dynamic. Lindelof's father had recently passed away, which is what inspired Jack's immediate backstory in this episode. I think there are a lot of autobiographical aspects to the Jack character, especially in this first season. Jack almost became a proxy for Lindelof, because he too had been thrust into the role of leadership, in which he had to take care of a whole group of people looking to him for reassurance and instruction.
When JJ left, which was right after the pilot got picked up, he was like, "You are going to run the show." And I was the CEO of what amounted to be a a $60 million a year corporation with no management experience. I was a writer, and I was not prepared to manage the show, let alone overcome the creative obstacles at that speed and that rate of time.
This entire episode can be taken as allegory for how Lindelof was feeling about being a showrunner during this period. So it's probably no surprise that Lindelof formed a close working partnership with Matthew Fox, who often referenced in interviews that they had deeper conversations behind the scenes. How as the lead actor he was entrusted with advanced knowledge and keeping certain plot secrets, and expressed that they shared a mutual trust as author and actor respectively. Both Lindelof and Fox speak very highly of each other, so I think Fox understood that there was a lot of Lindelof in the character, and that helped to bring them closer together. Many of Jack's hang-ups are self-reflective of Lindelof's own personal and professional hang-ups. Fear of failure, imposter syndrome, not being able to let go of the past, being a bad leader or making bad decisions in that role. There is a lot of the author in the text. I know Lost is considered an ensemble show, and it is, but there is never any doubt throughout the series that the main character above all others is Jack Shephard. The whole series is built around his specific character arc as he goes from damaged man of science to enlightened man of faith. The show literally begins and ends with him. We see him rise as a leader on the island, we see his need to control his circumstances and take responsibility for everyone else's lives, we see his strengths and weaknesses, his victories and failures, his various enemies from the physical to the ideological, right through to witnessing the fallout from many of his choices, including the deaths of those he promised to protect. His inability to let go of his guilt leads him into a despairing and all-consuming darkness until he hits rock bottom, and then, slowly, begins his ascent back up to the light. Now as a man willing to let go of his need to control his fate and the fates of others, letting go makes him enlightened and lighter. There is only one other significant number mentioned in this episode, and it's when Jack tells Chrissy at the airline check-in desk that he needs to land at LAX in 16 hours to bury his father. Join me for the next episode guide, where I'll be breaking down and explaining House of the Rising Sun, the episode that introduced us to a massive mythological mystery, Adam and Eve, and also one of the more effective love stories in the series. Please like, share and subscribe to keep this channel alive. Consider donating to my Patreon if you'd like to see me make more videos just like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back on the island.
No.